Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of person who solved problems with her hands. At 28, she worked as a lead mechanic at Henderson Auto Repair, the only woman in a shop full of men who had long stopped seeing her gender and only saw her skill. Her hands could diagnose engine troubles that stumped mechanics with twice her experience. Those same hands had built her own motorcycle from spare parts, renovated her small apartment, and helped her younger brother through countless homework assignments when their parents worked double shifts. On that crisp October morning, Sarah arrived at work 30 minutes early as she always did. The shop smelled of motor oil and fresh coffee, and she breathed it in like perfume. Today was special. She had been selected to work on the vintage 1967 Mustang that belonged to Mr. Chen, a longtime customer who trusted only the best with his prized possession. Sarah had been dreaming about this moment for months, studying engine schematics and researching original part specifications. She rolled under the car with confident movements, her practiced hands already reaching for tools before her eyes could fully assess the situation. The transmission needed careful attention, and Sarah positioned herself perfectly to access the mounting bolts. Everything was routine, familiar, safe. She had performed this exact procedure hundreds of times before, but routine can be shattered in an instant. The hydraulic lift had been acting slightly sluggish for weeks. Tony, the shop owner, had mentioned getting it serviced, but it still held cars securely, so the repair kept getting postponed. Sarah knew about the issue but had used the lift countless times without problems. Experience had taught her to trust her tools, and this morning felt no different from any other. She was reaching for a wrench when she heard it, a sound like a mechanical sigh, barely audible over the shop's ambient noise. The lift was slowly losing pressure. Sarah's mind processed the danger immediately, but her body was trapped in an awkward position under nearly 2 tons of classic American muscle car. Time moved differently in those crucial seconds. Sarah tried to roll away, her survival instincts screaming at every muscle to move faster than humanly possible. She almost made it. Her torso cleared the danger zone, but her right arm was still extended when the Mustang settled onto the emergency safety locks with a thunderous crash. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She heard herself scream, a sound that seemed to come from someone else entirely. Within seconds, the entire shop erupted in chaos. Tony came running, followed by Jake and Miguel, their faces white with shock and fear. "Don't move her," Tony shouted while simultaneously calling, "You 101." His hands shook as he tried to assess the situation without disturbing Sarah. Her right arm was pinned between the car's transmission and the concrete floor, bent at an impossible angle. Sarah's vision blurred as shock began setting in, but her mind remained surprisingly clear. She could feel the grinding sensation of bone fragments moving inside her arm, and she knew immediately that this was catastrophic. This wasn't a simple break that would heal in 6 weeks with a cast. This was career-ending, life-changing damage. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, though it felt like hours to everyone in the shop. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as they worked to stabilize her before attempting to move the car. The lead paramedic, a calm woman named Janet, spoke to Sarah in steady, reassuring tones while coordinating with the fire department to safely lift the Mustang. "Stay with me, Sarah," Janet kept saying. "You're doing great. We're going to take good care of you." When they finally freed her arm, Sarah got her first clear look at the damage. Her right forearm was twisted and swollen beyond recognition, clearly broken in multiple places, but what frightened her most was the lack of sensation in her fingers. She tried to move them and felt nothing. No movement, no feeling. Just emptiness where her most important tools used to be. During the ambulance ride to Memorial Hospital, Sarah's mind raced despite the pain medication. Her entire identity was built around what she could create and fix with her hands. She thought about the unfinished Mustang, about the apartment renovation she had been planning, about the motorcycle engine she was rebuilding in her garage. Would she ever be able to hold a wrench again? Would her fingers work? Would she still be herself if she couldn't work with her hands? The emergency room was a blur of bright lights, urgent voices and medical procedures. Dr. Williams, the orthopedic surgeon, examined x-rays with a grim expression that he tried to hide from Sarah. The damage was extensive. Multiple fractures in both the radius and ulna bones, severe nerve damage and crushing injuries to the soft tissue. The word complicated kept appearing in hushed conversations between medical staff. "We're going to do everything we can," Dr. Williams told Sarah before surgery. "But I need to be honest with you. This is a very serious injury. Even with successful surgery, you're looking at a long recovery period, and there may be permanent limitations to function and mobility." As the anesthesia began taking effect, Sarah's last conscious thought was about her hands. She had always taken them for granted, assuming they would always be there, strong and capable. Now, as darkness closed in, she realized that she was about to begin the biggest challenge of her life, a challenge that had nothing to do with engines or transmissions, and everything to do with discovering who she was when stripped of everything she thought defined her. The operating room doors closed behind her gurney, and Sarah Martinez began the first chapter of a journey she never expected to take. Her broken arm was just the beginning. The real work, rebuilding not just bone and muscle but hope and identity, was yet to come. Sarah woke up in the hospital room 3 days later with a fog in her head and a weight on her chest that had nothing to do with the pain medication. Her right arm was encased in a complex external fixator, a medieval-looking contraption of metal rods and pins that held her shattered bones in place. The device looked like something she might have assembled in the shop, but now it was attached to her body, foreign and intimidating. The first thing she tried to do was wiggle her fingers. Nothing. She stared at her hand, willing it to move, concentrating with every fiber of her being. Her fingers remained still and pale, like 5 small strangers attached to her arm. Dr. Williams had warned her about nerve damage, but seeing it, or rather, not feeling it, was devastating in a way that no medical explanation could prepare her for. Her brother Miguel sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He had been there since the accident, taking time off from his job at the bank to stay with her. When he saw her struggling with her fingers, he quickly looked away, pretending to be interested in the television mounted on the wall. "How long have I been out?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar. 3 days. They had to do 2 surgeries, Miguel replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Dr. Williams said the first one went well, but they had to go back in to fix some complications." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to process this information. 2 surgeries meant the damage was worse than anyone had initially thought. She remembered Dr. Williams' careful words before the first operation, his reluctance to make promises about her recovery. Now she understood why. The next few days blurred together in a haze of pain management, physical therapy consultations, and visits from insurance representatives. Sarah's workers' compensation case was straightforward. The accident was clearly work-related, but the paperwork seemed endless. More challenging were the conversations with rehabilitation specialists who spoke in careful, measured tones about realistic expectations and adaptive strategies. Physical therapy began immediately, even while Sarah was still bedridden. A cheerful therapist named Lisa worked with her on basic exercises designed to maintain circulation and prevent muscle atrophy. These sessions were humbling and exhausting. Simple tasks like flexing her wrist sent shooting pains up her arm, and attempting to move her fingers remained an exercise in futility. "Nerve damage takes time," Lisa explained during one particularly frustrating session. "Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes months before we see improvement. Some patients recover full function, others learn to adapt. Every case is different." Sarah hated the word adapt. It sounded like giving up, like accepting that she would never be whole again. She had built her entire life around being capable and independent. The idea of adapting to limitations felt like accepting defeat before the fight had really begun. The hardest part wasn't the physical pain, which was manageable with medication. It was the cascade of realizations about how much her life was about to change. She couldn't drive her motorcycle, couldn't even start it without full use of both hands. Her apartment renovation project sat half-finished, with tools scattered around that she might never be able to use properly again. Most devastating of all, she couldn't work. Tony had been wonderfully supportive, visiting regularly and assuring her that her job would be waiting when she recovered. But they both knew that mechanic work required capabilities she might not regain. Financial stress began mounting almost immediately. Workers' compensation covered her medical bills and a portion of her salary, but it wasn't enough to maintain her lifestyle. Sarah had always lived independently, proud of her ability to support herself without help from anyone. Now she found herself calculating how long her savings would last and wondering if she would need to move back in with her parents. Friends from the shop visited regularly, bringing updates about work and trying to maintain normal conversation, but Sarah could see the discomfort in their eyes when they looked at her arm apparatus, the way they struggled to find the right words. Jake brought her a puzzle, thinking it might help pass the time, but Sarah stared at the box in frustration. How could she work on a puzzle when she couldn't feel her fingers? Sleep became elusive. The external fixator made it impossible to find a comfortable position, and when she did manage to doze off, she often woke from dreams where she was working under cars, only to remember her new reality. During the long, dark hours of early morning, doubt crept in like a persistent ache. What if she never regained function in her hand? What if this was as good as it would get? Dr. Williams remained cautiously optimistic during his daily rounds, but Sarah had learned to read between the lines of medical speak. When he said progressing well, she knew he meant the bones were healing properly, not that she would definitely regain normal use of her hand. When he mentioned alternative career options, she understood that he was preparing her for the possibility that her days as a mechanic were over. The hospital social worker, Mrs. Patterson, visited to discuss discharge planning and long-term care options. She brought pamphlets about vocational rehabilitation and disability services, resources Sarah had never imagined needing. Mrs. Patterson was kind but practical, explaining how Sarah could modify her living space for one-handed living, and discussing career retraining programs. Many people go on to have fulfilling careers after injuries like yours, Mrs. Patterson said gently. It's about finding new ways to use your existing skills and knowledge. Sarah nodded politely but felt hollow inside. Her existing skills were all manual, all dependent on the precise coordination of both hands. How could she translate 28 years of mechanical knowledge into something that didn't require the ability to actually work on engines? On her 8th day in the hospital, Sarah experienced her lowest moment yet. She had been struggling to eat breakfast with her left hand, dropping scrambled eggs and feeling frustrated by such a simple task, when she accidentally knocked over her water glass. The plastic cup hit the floor and spilled water everywhere. And something about that small incident broke her completely. She cried for the first time since the accident, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical pain. Miguel found her like that when he arrived for his daily visit, and he didn't try to comfort her with words. He simply sat on the edge of her bed and held her good hand while she grieved for the life she had lost. But even in that moment of despair, something inside Sarah was already stirring, a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. She didn't recognize it yet as determination, but it was there, waiting for the right moment to ignite into something powerful enough to fuel the longest fight of her life. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Sarah's discharge from the hospital. She was sitting in her apartment, staring at the half-renovated kitchen that mocked her with its unfinished state. Cabinet doors hung askew, waiting for hardware she couldn't install. The new faucet sat in its box, surrounded by tools she couldn't properly hold. Everything felt impossible. Her phone rang and she awkwardly answered it with her left hand. It was Maria Santos, a woman she had never met but whose voice carried an unusual combination of warmth and steel. Sarah, this is Maria from the Trauma Recovery Support Group at Community Center. Dr. Williams gave me your number. I hope that's okay. Sarah's initial reaction was defensive. She didn't need support groups or therapy sessions where people sat in circles talking about their feelings. She was a mechanic, someone who solved problems through action. Not words. I appreciate the call, but I'm really not interested in... I lost my right leg in a motorcycle accident 7 years ago. Maria interrupted gently. I was a professional dancer. Thought my life was over. I called the first person who tried to help me some pretty colorful names. Something in Maria's voice made Sarah pause. Here was someone who understood loss in a way that well-meaning friends and family couldn't. Someone who had stared into the same abyss of impossible change. The group meets Thursday evenings, Maria continued. Just coffee and conversation. No pressure, no forced positivity. Just people who get it. Think about it. After hanging up, Sarah found herself thinking about Maria's words for the rest of the day. That evening, she sat down with a notebook in her left hand, determined to make a list of everything she could still do. Writing was clumsy and slow, but she persisted. She could think. She could problem solve. She could learn. She could teach others what she knew about engines and repairs. The list was shorter than she hoped, but it existed. For the first time since the accident, Sarah focused on capabilities rather than limitations. Thursday evening arrived, and Sarah almost didn't go. She sat in her car outside the community center for 10 minutes, engine running, ready to drive away. But something, curiosity, desperation, or maybe just stubbornness, made her turn off the engine and walk inside. The support group was nothing like she expected. No circle of chairs, no formal structure, just 8 people of various ages sitting around a large table with coffee and homemade cookies. Maria turned out to be a vibrant woman in her 40s with an infectious laugh and a prosthetic leg that she wore without self-consciousness. "Everyone, this is Sarah," Maria announced. "She's dealing with some serious arm and hand injuries from a workplace accident." Sarah expected sympathy or pity, but instead found herself facing a group of people who simply nodded with understanding. There was David, a construction worker who had lost 3 fingers to a table saw. Rebecca, a teacher who suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident. James, a veteran dealing with PTSD and a prosthetic arm. Each person carried invisible scars alongside their visible ones. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on practical matters like adaptive equipment and insurance battles, but also deeper topics about identity and purpose. Sarah found herself sharing details about her accident that she hadn't been able to discuss with family or friends. These people understood the peculiar grief of losing part of yourself while still being alive. "The hardest part for me," David shared, "was accepting that different doesn't mean less than. It took me 2 years to believe that." Rebecca nodded. "I used to be the teacher who could handle 30 kids at once, remember everyone's names, juggle a dozen tasks. After my accident, I had to relearn everything, how to concentrate, how to organize my thoughts. I felt like a fraud going back to work." "But you did go back," Sarah observed. "Eventually, but I had to become a different kind of teacher. Slower, more deliberate, but maybe more compassionate too. The kids respond to authenticity, not perfection." As the evening progressed, Sarah realized that each person in the room had faced the same fundamental choice she was facing: give up or adapt. Not the passive adaptation that healthcare workers had talked about, but an active, creative reimagining of what their lives could become. James showed her photos on his phone of a motorcycle he was rebuilding, using specialized tools designed for one-handed operation. "Took me 6 months to figure out the setup, but I'm riding again. Different bike, different approach, same freedom." After the meeting, Maria walked Sarah to her car. "You know what I see when I look at you?" she asked. "Someone whose career is probably over," Sarah replied with bitter humor. "I see someone who understands machines, who knows how things work and why they break. Do you know how valuable that knowledge is? The world is full of people who need their cars fixed, who want to learn basic maintenance, who are intimidated by anything mechanical." Maria paused beside Sarah's car, a modest sedan that had replaced her beloved motorcycle. "When I couldn't dance anymore, I thought my body had betrayed me. Took me years to realize that my body had simply changed the conversation. Instead of expressing stories through movement, I started teaching movement to others, helping them find their own physical voices." Driving home that night, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since the accident: curiosity about her future instead of dread. The conversation with Maria and the support group had planted seeds of possibility she hadn't known existed. Over the next few days, Sarah began researching adaptive tools and techniques. She discovered a whole world of modified equipment designed for people with limited hand function: one-handed wrenches, magnetic tool holders, specialized grips that could accommodate her limited finger mobility. The tools were expensive, but they existed. She also started exploring online communities of mechanics and automotive enthusiasts who had overcome physical challenges. She found YouTube channels run by disabled mechanics, forums where people shared adaptive techniques, and stories of garage owners who had successfully modified their work practices. More importantly, she began to separate her identity from her specific physical capabilities. She was still someone who understood how engines worked, how to diagnose problems, how to teach others. Those skills lived in her mind and her experience, not just in her hands. Sarah called the local community college and inquired about their automotive technology program. Did they need guest lecturers? Was there any interest in basic car maintenance classes for the general public? The response was enthusiastic. There was always demand for knowledgeable instructors, and her real-world experience was exactly what their students needed. She also reached out to Tony at the shop. Instead of asking about returning to her old position, she proposed something different. Could she work part-time as a diagnostic specialist and customer educator? She could assess vehicle problems, create repair estimates, and teach customers basic maintenance. Tasks that required her expertise but not necessarily full manual dexterity. Tony was intrigued. We've always talked about offering customer education workshops. You know more about cars than anyone I've ever worked with, Sarah. Let's figure out how to make this work. For the first time in weeks, Sarah went to sleep feeling hopeful. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but it existed. She was beginning to understand that her accident hadn't ended her story. It had simply forced her to start a new chapter. And maybe, just maybe, this new chapter could be something she had never imagined but might learn to love. 3 months after the accident, Sarah achieved her first real victory. She successfully diagnosed a transmission problem that had stumped 2 other mechanics. The triumph happened on a cold February morning when Mrs. Chen brought her husband's Mustang, the same car that had changed Sarah's life, back to Henderson, auto repair for a mysterious shifting issue. Tony had called Sarah asking if she could take a look. Her new role as diagnostic specialist was still experimental, but her analytical skills had only sharpened during her recovery. She arrived at the shop feeling nervous but determined, carrying her custom-designed diagnostic kit in a specially modified bag that accommodated her limited grip strength. The Mustang sat in the same bay where her accident had occurred. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she approached it, but she forced herself to focus on the problem at hand. She couldn't crawl underneath anymore, but she had learned to use different tools and techniques. A digital inspection camera became her eyes in tight spaces. Wireless diagnostic equipment replaced hands-on testing methods. After 2 hours of careful analysis, listening to engine sounds with an almost supernatural attention, and running computerized tests, Sarah identified the issue: a worn shift solenoid that was causing intermittent electrical signals. It was a subtle problem that required experience to recognize, exactly the kind of diagnostic challenge that had always energized her. "That's it," she told Jake, who had been assisting her. "Solenoid B shift valve. It's sending inconsistent signals to the transmission control module." Jake ran the computerized test she suggested, and the results confirmed her diagnosis. Tony clapped her on the back with genuine admiration. 3 other guys looked at this car and couldn't figure it out. "You nailed it in 2 hours." The victory felt enormous, not because it was particularly difficult, but because it proved that her most valuable skills were intact. Her hands might be different, but her mind remained sharp. Her experience still relevant, her intuitive understanding of mechanical systems undiminished. Word about Sarah's diagnostic abilities spread quickly through the shop's customer base. People began requesting her specifically for complex problems. She developed a reputation for solving mysteries that others couldn't crack, and her consultation schedule began filling up weeks in advance. Simultaneously, Sarah's teaching career was taking off at the community college. Her first class, Basic Car Maintenance for Everyone, had started with 12 nervous students who knew nothing about automobiles. Sarah had been terrified that her physical limitations would make her an ineffective instructor, but she discovered something unexpected. Her recent experience with adaptation made her a more patient and creative teacher. She couldn't demonstrate every technique manually, but she learned to explain concepts more clearly, to break down complex procedures into understandable steps, and to encourage students to develop their own problem-solving approaches. Her classes became popular because she created an environment where people felt safe asking questions and making mistakes. One evening, a student named Jennifer approached Sarah after class. Jennifer was a single mother who had been intimidated by car repairs her entire life, always dependent on others to help with vehicle maintenance. "I changed my oil yesterday," Jennifer announced proudly, "by myself. First time in my life I've done anything mechanical. And I wasn't scared because you taught me that understanding is more important than strength." Sarah felt tears welling up as she realized that her teaching was empowering others in ways her previous work never had. As a mechanic, she had fixed individual problems. As an instructor, she was giving people knowledge and confidence that would serve them for years. The support group had become a central part of Sarah's routine. Every Thursday evening, she looked forward to connecting with people who understood her journey. The group had evolved into genuine friendships, with members supporting, each other through setbacks and celebrating victories. Together, David had returned to construction work using specialized tools and had started a small business building accessible home modifications. Rebecca was thriving as a teacher, having found new ways to connect with students who struggled with learning differences. James had completed his motorcycle restoration and was planning a cross-country trip. Maria had become Sarah's unofficial mentor, offering practical advice and emotional support during difficult moments. When Sarah worried about her financial future, Maria helped her apply for vocational rehabilitation grants. When Sarah struggled with phantom pain in her damaged hand, Maria shared coping strategies that actually worked. "You're becoming someone you never could have been before the accident," Maria observed one evening. "Not better or worse than who you were, just different. And sometimes different opens doors you never knew existed." Sarah's personal life was also slowly rebuilding. She had started dating again, something that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Her new relationship with Mark, a high school teacher she had met through the community college, was built on mutual respect and shared interests rather than assumptions about traditional roles or capabilities. Mark admired Sarah's intelligence and resilience. He didn't see her injury as something to overcome or ignore, but as part of the complete person he was getting to know. When they worked on projects together, he naturally adapted to her needs without making her feel helpless or different. The adaptive tools Sarah had gradually acquired were transforming her independence. Modified kitchen utensils allowed her to cook elaborate meals again. Specialized grips enabled her to use most hand tools effectively. A voice-activated computer system helped her manage paperwork and correspondence with minimal frustration. Most significantly, Sarah had begun working on her own vehicle modifications. With help from James and online communities of adaptive mechanics, she was designing custom tools and techniques that could help other mechanics with similar injuries. Her apartment garage had become a testing ground for innovative solutions to mechanical challenges. She documented her adaptations with detailed photographs and instructions, creating online tutorials that were being viewed by thousands of people worldwide. Requests for advice came from mechanics, automotive students, and rehabilitation specialists who were working with other injured workers. Sarah's relationship with the Mustang had come full circle in an unexpected way. Mr. Chen, grateful for her diagnostic expertise and moved by her story, had offered to let her restore a second vintage Mustang that he owned. Working with adaptive tools and assistance from shop colleagues, Sarah was slowly bringing the 1965 Fastback back to life. The restoration project became a symbol of her own recovery, taking something damaged and worn, applying patience and skill, and creating something beautiful and functional again. Every successful repair on the car felt like proof that broken things could indeed be made whole, even if they ended up different from their original form. By spring, Sarah had achieved something she hadn't dared hope for months earlier: financial stability and professional satisfaction. Her combination of diagnostic work, teaching, and consultation was generating steady income. More importantly, she was genuinely excited about her work again, looking forward to each day's challenges and opportunities. The woman who had once defined herself entirely through physical capability was discovering that her true strength had always been mental. Her ability to understand complex systems, solve problems creatively, and help others learn. The accident had forced her to excavate these deeper talents and build a career around them. 1 year after her accident, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Amanda Foster, director of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and she had an unusual proposition. "Ms. Martinez, I've been following your work in adaptive automotive repair techniques. Your online tutorials have been shared in safety conferences across the country. We're launching a new program to help injured workers transition back into their fields, and we'd like you to lead the automotive component." Sarah sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what Dr. Foster was suggesting. A national program meant resources, funding, and the opportunity to help thousands of people facing challenges similar to her own. It also meant stepping far outside her comfort zone into a role she never could have imagined. The position would involve developing training protocols, creating educational materials, and traveling to rehabilitation centers nationwide. Dr. Foster continued, "Your unique combination of technical expertise and personal experience with adaptation makes you uniquely qualified." After the call ended, Sarah stared at her reflection in the window, hardly recognizing the confident woman looking back at her. 12 months ago, she had been a skilled mechanic whose identity was shattered by a workplace accident. Now she was being offered the chance to revolutionize how injured workers returned to automotive careers. She accepted the position, and within weeks found herself immersed in a project larger and more complex than anything she had ever undertaken. Working with occupational therapists, engineers, and other injured mechanics, Sarah began developing comprehensive training programs that could be implemented nationwide. The work required her to travel extensively, visiting rehabilitation centers, vocational schools, and adaptive technology companies. Each location brought new challenges and opportunities to refine her approach. In Phoenix, she worked with a former NASCAR mechanic who had lost his dominant hand in a racing accident. In Detroit, she collaborated with auto plant workers recovering from repetitive stress injuries. In Seattle, she helped design adaptive tools for a woman mechanic dealing with chronic pain from a back injury. Every person she met added new dimensions to her understanding of adaptation and resilience. She learned that successful return to work wasn't just about modified tools or techniques. It was about rebuilding confidence, redefining professional identity, and creating workplace cultures that valued capability over conformity. Sarah's most significant breakthrough came while working with a team at MIT's Adaptive Technology Lab. Together, they developed a revolutionary diagnostic system that used augmented reality and voice commands to guide mechanics through complex repair procedures. The system could overlay detailed instructions onto a mechanic's field of vision while responding to spoken commands, making intricate repairs accessible to people with various physical limitations. The technology had applications far beyond helping injured workers. It could assist new mechanics learning complex procedures, support experienced workers tackling unfamiliar systems, and provide remote expertise to technicians in isolated locations. Major automotive manufacturers began expressing interest in the system, recognizing its potential to improve efficiency and reduce errors across their service networks. Sarah found herself presenting at international conferences, her presentations drawing standing ovations from audiences of engineers, medical professionals, and business leaders. She spoke about the hidden potential that emerges when necessity forces innovation, about the value of incorporating diverse perspectives into technical design, and about the strength that comes from rebuilding rather than simply recovering. The media attention was intense and sometimes overwhelming. National newspapers ran feature stories about her journey from injured worker to innovation leader. Technical magazines interviewed her about the future of adaptive automotive repair. Television programs invited her to demonstrate her diagnostic techniques and discuss workplace safety. Through it all, Sarah remained grounded by her continued involvement with the support group and her teaching at the community college. These connections reminded her that behind every statistic about workplace injury was a real person facing the same fears and challenges she had experienced. Her relationship with Mark had deepened throughout this period of rapid professional growth. He provided emotional stability and practical support as Sarah navigated her expanding responsibilities. When she worried about losing touch with her roots as pressure mounted to expand her program internationally, Mark reminded her that her greatest strength was her ability to connect with people facing specific challenges. The culmination of Sarah's first year in the national program came with the opening of the first comprehensive adaptive automotive training center in Chicago. The facility was everything she had envisioned: a fully equipped automotive shop with adaptive tools and technologies, classrooms designed for various learning styles, and a staff of instructors who combined technical expertise with personal experience of disability and adaptation. The opening ceremony drew hundreds of attendees, including injury rehabilitation specialists, automotive industry representatives, and, most importantly, injured workers eager to explore new possibilities for their careers. Sarah stood before the crowd, looking out at faces that reflected the same mixture of hope and uncertainty she had felt during her darkest moments after the accident. "This center represents more than adaptive technology," she told the audience. "It represents the recognition that human potential is far more flexible and powerful than we usually realize. Every person who walks through these doors brings unique challenges, but they also bring unique strengths that can reshape how we think about work and capability." Among the attendees was Tony from Henderson Auto Repair, Beaming with pride as he watched his former employee address an international audience, Jake and Miguel sat in the front row, amazed at the transformation they had witnessed. Maria from the support group wiped away tears as she listened to Sarah speak with the authority and passion of someone who had found her true calling. The first class at the Chicago Center included 15 students from across the Midwest, each dealing with different injuries and adaptations. There was Carlos, a former transmission specialist learning to work with a prosthetic arm. Linda, a brake technician managing chronic pain from a spinal injury. Robert, a young mechanic with traumatic brain injury, learning new ways to process and retain technical information. Sarah worked individually with each student, helping them discover their own paths to adaptation. She taught Carlos specialized gripping techniques that maximized his prosthetics capabilities. She helped Linda develop pain management strategies that allowed her to work effectively within her physical limitations. She created visual learning systems that helped Robert organize and access technical knowledge in new ways. But perhaps her most important teaching was by example. Every day the students watched Sarah approach complex problems with creativity and determination. They saw how she had transformed limitation into innovation, how she had built a career that was not just different from her original path, but potentially more impactful. 3 months after the center opened, Sarah received her most meaningful feedback yet. It came in the form of a letter from Jennifer, her former student from the community college basic maintenance class. Dear Sarah, the letter read, I wanted you to know that watching your recovery inspired me to pursue mechanical training. I just completed an automotive technology program and start work next week as a technician trainee. You taught me that being different doesn't mean being less capable. Thank you for showing me that strength comes in many forms. As Sarah read the letter in her office overlooking the training floor, where injured workers were discovering new possibilities for their futures, she realized that her broken arm had indeed led to the greatest victory of her life, not her own recovery, but her ability to help others find their own paths to strength and purpose. 5 years after the accident that changed everything, Sarah Martinez stood in the main assembly hall of the Detroit Auto Show, watching a live demonstration of the adaptive automotive system that bore her name. The Martinez diagnostic platform was being unveiled by 3 major automotive manufacturers who had collaborated to bring her innovative technology to market worldwide. The demonstration featured Marcus, a veteran mechanic who had lost both legs in an IED explosion in Afghanistan. Using Sarah's augmented reality system and specially designed workstations, Marcus effortlessly diagnosed and began repairs on a complex hybrid engine system. The crowd watched in amazement as the technology seamlessly bridged the gap between Marcus's expertise and his physical limitations. Sarah felt a familiar mix of pride and humility as she observed the demonstration. The technology was sophisticated, but its real power lay in what it represented. Proof that human potential could be unlocked rather than limited by adaptive innovation. What had started as her personal struggle to remain relevant in her chosen field had evolved into a global movement that was transforming entire industries. The Adaptive Automotive Training Program now operated in 47 locations across 6 countries. Thousands of injured workers had completed the program, with an employment success rate of 93%. But the program's impact extended far beyond helping injured workers return to their careers. The adaptive technologies and inclusive design principles developed through the program were being implemented in automotive shops, manufacturing plants, and technical schools worldwide, creating more accessible work environments for everyone. Sarah's role had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. As Director of Global Adaptive Technology Innovation, she oversaw research partnerships with major universities, collaborated with technology companies on breakthrough assistive devices, and advised government agencies on workplace safety and inclusion policies. Her work had influenced legislation in 12 countries, helping to establish new standards for workplace accommodation and injury prevention. Yet despite her international recognition and professional success, Sarah never forgot the personal connections that had sustained her through her darkest moments. She still participated in the original support group every Thursday evening when she was in town, now serving as a mentor to newly injured workers facing their own journeys of adaptation and discovery. The group had evolved over the years, with some members moving on and new faces joining regularly, but the core principle remained the same: people supporting people through the challenges of rebuilding their lives after trauma. Maria, now in her early 50s, continued to facilitate the group with the same warmth and wisdom that had first drawn Sarah to attend. Sarah's personal life had flourished alongside her professional achievements. She and Mark had married 3 years earlier, in a ceremony held at the Chicago Adaptive Training Center, surrounded by friends and colleagues from around the world. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep understanding that love meant supporting each other's growth and dreams. They had recently bought a house with a large garage, where Sarah continued to work on personal projects and test new, adaptive technologies. The garage had become a pilgrimage site of sorts for injured mechanics and automotive enthusiasts who traveled from across the country to see where many breakthrough innovations had been developed and to meet the woman who had transformed perceived limitations into revolutionary possibilities. Sarah's relationship with her original workplace had come full circle in the most beautiful way possible. Henderson Auto Repair had become the first certified adaptive automotive shop in the nation, serving as a model for inclusive workplace design. Tony had embraced the changes enthusiastically, discovering that adaptive technologies made his shop more efficient and attractive to a broader range of both employees and customers. Jake had completed training through Sarah's program and now worked as an adaptive technology specialist, helping other shops implement inclusive practices. Miguel had been inspired by his sister's journey to pursue engineering, specializing in assistive technology design. The entire Martinez family had become advocates for workplace safety and injury prevention, sharing their story at conferences and safety training sessions. The vintage Mustang that had nearly ended. Sarah's career had been restored to pristine condition and now served as a mobile demonstration unit for adaptive repair techniques. Sarah traveled with the car to automotive shows and training events, using it to teach both technical skills and life lessons about resilience and adaptation. On this particular evening at the Detroit Auto Show, Sarah was scheduled to deliver the keynote address to an audience of 15,000 automotive professionals. As she prepared backstage, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young woman who had once defined herself entirely through physical capability seemed like a different person, though Sarah understood that every experience had been necessary to create who she had become. Her speech that night would become legendary in automotive circles, not for its technical content, but for its powerful message about human potential and the value of diverse perspectives in solving complex challenges. 5 years ago, I thought my career was over, because I could no longer perform the physical tasks that had defined my professional identity, Sarah told the audience. I was wrong about almost everything. My career wasn't ending, it was being reborn into something I never could have imagined. My limitations weren't permanent barriers, they were invitations to innovate. My injury wasn't a tragedy, it was the beginning of the most meaningful work of my life. She paused, looking out at thousands of faces representing every level of the automotive industry, from entry-level technicians to corporate executives. Every person in this room has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their physical capabilities, their background, or their personal challenges. The future of our industry depends not on excluding people who are different, but on embracing different perspectives and finding new ways to unlock human potential. Innovation happens when necessity meets creativity, and some of our greatest necessities come from our greatest challenges. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, but Sarah's most treasured moment came afterward. When a young mechanic approached her backstage, he was using a wheelchair and looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Martinez, I was injured in a motorcycle accident 6 months ago. The doctors told me I'd never work as a mechanic again. But watching your demonstration tonight, seeing what's possible, I think I'd like to apply to your training program." Sarah smiled, remembering her own despair in those early days after her accident, when the future had seemed impossibly dark and narrow. "What's your name?" "David Rodriguez. I've been working on cars since I was 12. It's all I've ever wanted to do. David, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was facing the same fears you're facing now. Your accident didn't end your story as a mechanic. It's about to begin a new chapter that might be more incredible than anything you've ever imagined. Are you ready to discover what that chapter looks like?" As Sarah watched hope return to David's eyes, she understood that this was her true victory. Not the awards on her office wall, not the technology that bore her name, not the international recognition or professional success. Her real triumph was the knowledge that her journey through darkness had created light for others facing similar challenges. Walking back to her hotel that night, Sarah paused to call Maria and share the events of the evening. As always, Maria listened with the wisdom of someone who understood that the greatest victories aren't about overcoming limitations, but about discovering that what we thought were limitations were actually doorways to possibilities we never knew existed. Sarah Martinez had learned that sometimes the most devastating breaks, whether in bones or in life plans, create space for something stronger and more beautiful to grow. Her arm had been broken, but her spirit had indeed proven stronger than any bone. And in rebuilding herself, she had created tools and inspiration that would help countless others rebuild their own lives, one adaptive innovation at a time.